Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Facilities Management in the Post-Pandemic Era. I'm Ann Cosgrove, the Editor-in-Chief of Facility Executive Magazine, and this webinar is presented by ARC Facilities. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Our speakers will be on video today, so if you'd like to view them along the top of your screen or on the side, you can pull down the gray bar in your window so that they're visible to you. Please note the control panel on your screen. You could submit your questions in the question box there at any time. We will have a Q&A portion after the presentation, so please send in your questions and we will address them at the end. Also, if you at any time experience a technical difficulty or have a non-content related question, you can send a message in that question box and someone on our team will answer you privately. There is an orange arrow on the left side of the control panel. Clicking on that will either expand or collapse it, so please be sure it's expanded so you can access the question box. Also, if you're interested in a continuing education credit, you will receive a certificate of attendance and an email from Facility Executive after this webinar, and you can report that to your association for the credit. Now we'll move along and introduce your speakers, who you'll be seeing on screen. We'll have a nice panel discussion today on the topic. So first we have Dr. Weikal Beauregard, PhD. He's the Global Category Leader for IBM Consulting and Procurement BPO. He's heading IBM's delivery and strategy for facility management, maintenance, repair, and operations for IBM clients around the globe. Also, we have Steve Weikal. He is a lecturer, researcher, and the industry chair of the Real Estate Technology Initiative at the MIT Center for Real Estate. And as an ardent industry advocate and thought leader, he has addressed numerous industry groups, including at NFMT, and he's a board member of multiple real estate technology startups. Also, Suri Suriyakumar is CEO of ARC Facilities, our sponsor today, and he will facilitate our discussion today. Suri is a thought leader who has led technology development in the field of construction documents and information management, and these innovations today are delivering powerful productivity enhancement solutions in the facilities industry. So we look forward to an informative and lively talk today, and of course your questions at the end. I will hand it over to Suri. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Ann, and welcome everybody. I'm really excited to moderate this roundtable with two prominent thought leaders and speakers in the industry, both Steve and Weikal. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. Well, as you know, the subject we are going to talk about today is the post-pandemic operating conditions and how do senior leaders and management teams deal with it in the facilities environment. As you know, the pandemic is pretty much behind us. We are generally in agreement that the pandemic is behind us. COVID is going to hang around in some form or other for a while, but we do know the pandemic is behind us. However, some of the experiences we have had during the pandemic and the changes which happened are likely to stay. So that's the first thing we want to talk about. So three elements commonly talked about. Everybody talks about these three elements. So let's start with the first one, which is, working from home is a very, very commonly talked about subject. So Steve, I'll start with you. What's your take on that? And how do you think that's going to, is it here to stay? How do you think it will evolve, especially as related to the facilities industry?
Sure, sir. Thank you for having me, Weikal. Nice to see you again, and I'm delighted to be here and share some of the perspectives we're seeing at MIT from our research. This conversation about post-COVID or the future of work, as we all know, has been percolating ever since the pandemic first dropped on us, and a lot of different discussion about the various models and how it might look. But it is starting to take form. I did notice the data from Capsule saying that we thought generally occupancy in office buildings, again, this is just office buildings, but getting up around 40%, but now has eased back a little bit. So I think maybe we're going to have some false starts, a little bit of apprehension, but it seems to us that companies are starting to have enough data to start making decisions about how many days is the right amount of days to be in the office. Which types of jobs need more in office, which types of jobs don't need to be in office, which industries will be different in how they model it, and then from our standpoint, the technology that is enabling us to do that more effectively. I have to say, looking back on the last 2 years, the technology that we had in the moment and kind of stitched together worked pretty darn well. I kept waiting for the whole video network to completely crash given the amount of traffic. But you know, it actually held up pretty darn well. Michael, what was your perspective on it? It seemed to hold up.
I can't say it was without its challenges. Having teenagers in the house that are both in school and then when they're out of school, they're on the computer. So we definitely had to up our bandwidth and pay a bit more every month for that pipeline of data coming into the house. But yeah, overall, I think it held up. I think this question has been on everyone's mind now for 2 years, and we really haven't seen where companies are willing to go forward and make a judgment one way or the other until just recently. And I know I recently had forecasted that it was about 60% where we would see a return to work, right, in some hybrid work environment. I was recently looking up industry research from IDC that supported that. They were at 53% for essential roles, and then another, I think it was 14% for roles that are in ancillary spaces, and that may be utility plants, warehouses, logistics sites, things like that. And so if you look at the total, it's about 60% now that are returning to work in some way, shape, or form. And what we're going to see now is how do we respond to that as an industry? And it's reasonable to expect that you won't see what was happening, let's say what was acceptable in 2018, is acceptable now, right? We have to be far more responsive to those utilization rates and then manage our assets accordingly.
Absolutely. This is obviously evolving, and I think it will continue to evolve. As you said, Michael, we are starting to see a little more firmer statistics as to how really companies are thinking about it going forward. So that leads to the next question, Michael, is like, if that is really how it's evolving, what about remote access to workplace information, especially in places like, large facilities, right? In our space, in the industry. Remote access to information everybody's talking about it. That's another common thing I hear all the time. And then it might be just slightly different to people who are actually physically working in the facilities as against management, who needs what? How should senior leaders in our space think about that, Michael? What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, we've had this, the ability to run a pilot, so to speak, and Steve was talking about it, right? And so right or wrong, we've been doing that now for 2 years. And prior to that, there were some things happening that have enabled us to better prepare. And so prior to that, within AEC Industries, you had already seen the remote desktop, right, to enable facility individuals to work from a trailer, to work off-site. Prior to COVID, you were starting to see the emergence of mobile technology. But there still is a gap. And what I mean by that is, from an IT perspective, we've addressed, let's say, the CMMS, right? The maintenance management systems. We've addressed how we tie into ERP, but that would all still require some level of engagement with your kind of desktop or that remote desktop now. Right. Where there's the gap is still, how do you access relevant information in terms of how are you managing the facility? And how do you get that information real time? That's something that I think during COVID was, for some facility managers, a bit alarming, and that to access the info, we had to have, FTEs, employees, come back to the site, right? Or we were asking the question, okay, I know that this information is setting in a plan room, or I know this information is within the central utility plant. How do I get my employees to access it? Right. And so it really asked that key question. We started to see some movement in mobile technology and some movement with platforms, but really it's now, how do we connect that, the FTE, to the data that's critical, with what's happening on site.
Yeah. So Michael, you were actually saying that existed even prior to COVID. That existed. You could have asked that question, how to access just from the desktop. There are some aspects of the facility that's still very difficult just using the old technology, let alone this new mobile technology. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, that is exactly it. And right or wrong, facilities, if you look at facilities as a practice, right? it's fair to say we're not leading in terms of the adoption of IT, right? That's
Right.
reasonable. But because of that, we've created a situation where how now do we leverage that, to Steve's point, that critical data, how do we leverage that and get that real time to make informed decisions about how we're managing the asset? That key piece, remains something that's being developed, or we've got to find new avenues to access it.
Exactly. Very, very interesting subject and very interesting challenge for the, facilities professionals who are out there, especially in larger facilities, Michael and Steve. Yeah. So that leads to another thing, which is starting to evolve now, is labor shortage. Everybody is talking about labor shortage, right? And now not only you have not having access to information, but you're also starting to experience a labor shortage. Now, this is something we commonly spoke about in the facility space, that we just don't have enough technicians trained in the facility space. That's a common cry I hear all the time from senior management. Now we are faced with this labor shortage. How do you think that's going to play out, Steve?
We follow the human element of the engagement with the technology. I can speak anecdotally from what we've heard. We haven't really taken a deep dive into the research, but what I will say is that even in the startup, even with the technology companies, which arguably are the hottest places that everybody wants to go work, they are struggling like crazy to find people who can do the work. So if we're going to find the solutions to solve these problems in the facilities world, we can't even find the people to create the solutions for the facilities world. I will say that everybody knows that it's competitive out there. The industry, one area where we have been active is trying to diversify the industry. So on the one hand, you're just trying to find people who have skills. On the other hand, there's also pressure to help diversify your workforce, whether that's gender diversity or diversity of backgrounds, generally speaking. So it's a real challenge. Michael can probably speak to that better because he knows what the struggles are with the teams at IBM.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so this is of key importance to facility directors that are participating on the call. There's not a lot of academic research specific to the pipeline of employees coming in, but there is research. And as early as 2010, Ken Sullivan had a study out of Arizona State University that was tracking our pipeline of industry professionals and facility management. And the data was very clear. It showed that within the next 15 years, we were going to see essentially a cliff, because our employees were generally aging and they would begin to age out right about now. What's happened though is COVID, if you look at the impacts of COVID and the demographics that it was hitting, it was largely hitting those people that were looking at retirement anyway right now. And so if anything, it accelerated the retirement of key, let's say, experienced technicians in facility management. And that's of primary importance, because how do we then effectively transition or transfer knowledge, and how do we retain knowledge, right? If you think about facilities, a lot of that has to do with clear process and procedures, right?
Right.
Something else that I look at is what I kind of anecdotally refer to as the Fonzie effect, knowing how to walk up to the piece of equipment, hit it in the right spot, and get it going. Right. Well, when Fonzie retires, how do you transfer something like that, right? And how do you take tribal knowledge and convey it in such a way that a younger generation can utilize it? The other piece, though, Suri, is we don't have an effective pipeline coming in. There are some institutions that are training, but the pipeline coming in will mean this: we have to do more with less. We have to find ways to get greater utilization out of our field technicians and empower them to get more out of their workday.
Thank you, Michael. I mean, that actually the follow-up question I was going to have, because we already know in the facilities industry, right? We have a lot of tenured employees, a lot of baby boomers. A large majority of them are baby boomers. They were already starting to leave, and it is starting to create a problem. So that's actually, and Neil, you can go on to the next slide. The next big issue is the loss of tenured employees and the tribal knowledge, because buildings last forever. and there's a lot of knowledge these employees have built within them. They are like walking encyclopedias. What do you think, Steve? You know, how do you deal with that? How do you think about that for your senior management? You know, this is inevitable, right? As we stare at it right now.
I'll answer the question. I just want to touch on a couple of things Michael brought up. So I mentioned that because, you know, I spend most of my life with tech startups who are trying to reinvent, make things smoother, easier, more efficient. So it's possible that we will be able, Michael, to do more with less. And you're at IBM, which is all about doing a lot more with a lot less. It's very promising. Billions of dollars going into all areas we refer to it as built environment tech. It's not just prop tech anymore. It's all of the techs. They're starting to mash up and converge. So often the goal is more, better, faster. So those whether it's browser based or mobile based, those tools will help. They won't solve the whole problem. But the other thing I'll mention, and by the way, I'm not a boomer, but I find this very appealing. This guy sitting by the pool with the palm trees there. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. The other thing is that the incoming workers have an expectation about technology. So and I think buildings as some of the most complex things in the world, if you really interested in complex systems and software and technology, the future of buildings, these are like computers with a roof on them. We just haven't gotten through the transition yet. And I think that will be attractive to younger workers, but it also means we have to give them the tools that are attractive, because they go to companies where they've got the same kinds of tools they have out in their regular life. So I jokingly say that the real estate industry is run off of a 42-year-old technology called the spreadsheet, which the spreadsheet's a great piece of software, but we sort of have to graduate to the next generations, plural, of technology, and that will attract the workers. So as we start implementing these new tools, there's an opportunity to attract younger workers to fill in where the older workers are aging out. So, but anyway, I got off track a little bit, but I wanted to answer Michael's, just respond to Michael's comments earlier. But let me say, Suri, what we are seeing is there are channels of technology that are exciting in all areas. It hasn't yet been stitched together. And so whether it's IWMS, BMS, all the different, we use them all. We know they don't play in the sandbox well yet, but they will.
But we use them. Yes.
It will integrate. It will integrate. There's some promise with, I know those of you who know what digital twin is, we really look at that as a digital integration platform. And I know IBM probably is deep into this. You may not be able to talk about it, Michael, but I have no doubt. That's encouraging as a way to plug some of these legacy and new systems together so that we get a much richer framework to be able to do what we do. Michael, what about digital twin? Do you have a thought, or is it too early?
That one for me right now is a bit of a, let's say, contentious question, and that, so my background's architecture. I came out of an architecture program and degreed architect, and so when I think of digital twin in my mind, I immediately go to BIM, right? And I immediately go to an LOD 400 or greater that I can then leverage through modeling into my facility management to asset management. So in my mind, digital twin is all about AEC, but digital twin, like the term architecture, is being used in a lot of different forms right now, right? And so when we say digital twin, you kind of have to have this asterisk next to it so we know kind of in what context we're speaking to it. If we're within the context of facility maintenance, facility management, then I look at the digital twin as the overlay of technology that enables someone to really understand the facility, truly understand it, at times to walk it, to experience the space without physically being there, right? And if you can start to answer questions that are posed leveraging the digital twin, well, now it's value add. That's how I see it.
Yeah. And that's what the promise is. We're nowhere near getting there. I mean, maybe One Manhattan West, the New Brookfield project, actually has a twin, which is supposed to be pretty jaw-dropping. But to your point, we could then engage with the facilities as a facilities manager, engage with the facility without having to physically be there.
Well, Steve, the thing, so we hear terms like this, digital twin, and right, the reaction is usually, well, how do I get there, right? People always want to cut it. How do I do that? And oftentimes within our practice, I find myself expressing some caution here. And I say, you know, we need to walk before we can run. Only the most sophisticated facilities, right? We're talking petrochemical, semiconductor, high dollar, complex facilities are there. And a few of them are really there. And what I look for is, what are those other technologies that we can deploy that are the walk, right? That enable higher utilization rates that get us there. I saw a study yesterday, Steve. I was going through preparing for this, and one of the things they were saying, specific to the labor shortage, the millennials coming in and backfilling the boomers for these roles, right, within residential real estate, are bringing in the adoption of mobile technology for facility management as their asset management strategy, right? And it's new, right? And if you poll and your demographic is that demographic coming into the profession, let's say 25 to 35 years of age, they're looking at mobile technology and handhelds, right? If you do that same poll and you're looking at, let's say the people that are towards the twilight of their career, they're not in that space.
Right, right.
Yeah, and also one of the other things to think about, Steve, is that, like, I agree with Michael. Getting to digital twin is an extraordinarily expensive exercise, and it gets outdated fast if you don't stay on top of it. And that's all largely based right now on desktop technology and heavier computer utilization, not really on mobile technology. So that's
completely valid point. Completely valid point that only a few of the biggest companies will be able to spend that kind of money. So we're intrigued by what are the baby step or the intermediate technologies that can be used, and Suri, our facilities is one of those. It's one of those pieces, one of those functions that are going to be able, we think, to plug into the bigger platform when that platform is ready.
Right, I agree. I totally agree. So going back, so what do you think do you think business continuity will get affected if we continue to have loss of tenured employees, not enough trained employees, we are short-staffed? What do you think it will do for business continuity, Michael or Steve? I mean, feel free to jump in.
Well, so from my perspective, so Steve and I sat in a bit of a different perspective, and so I think we have a good fabric of views on this. As I look, I'm client-facing, and our goal really is to ensure that we're providing our clients that visibility into mitigating risk, and that's through the business continuity. And the challenge that we face then is how are we, again, transferring the knowledge, or I don't want to do the tools, because the tools need to be secondary to what's your vision of a solution, what's your vision of success and then what do we need to do to mitigate that risk? So you think about the questions you've asked with regard to labor shortages, right? I'll pivot and I'll look at how we look at our MRO, maintenance, repair, and operations, right?
Right.
We have key personnel that have tribal knowledge. This is an insurance spare, right? This is a critical spare. This is a consumable item, right? But then when you start to talk to corporate clients and you ask that question, right? Have you segmented your supply? And who's doing that? Oftentimes their feedback will be, oh, yeah, that's Joe. Joe's got it. Right? He's been doing this for years. It was great. Right. And their risk mitigation strategy is crossing their fingers. And so business continuity, that's we have examples like this throughout our business.
Right.
But the business continuity is a key piece for us. How do we mitigate risk? And then what does success look like? And what avenues, tools, or solutions we need to put in place, to answer those two questions.
Right. I mean, I think, even when we talk to customers, this comes up all the time. Steve, do you have a perspective on that from MIT perspective? Does that cross your bridge, desk all the time? Do people talk about it?
Well, I think there are different ways to, there are different aspects of continuity. One is the continuity where somebody suddenly takes sick and, or they take another job. There's that kind of continuity. There's the continuity where they're retiring, where they're going to retire. So there's sort of the unexpected and then the expected. And then also there's maybe some continuity risk in trying out these new tools too, right? When somebody has a solution and you've identified a problem that's getting solved, and there's some continuity risk with that, at least in the startup world. What if that solution doesn't get another round of funding? Or what if they get in over their head and they've got they're too good, they have too many clients and they don't have enough client service? What if it frankly just doesn't work at all? And that happens too in technology, because there's a lot of trial and error. So these are the different maybe versions of continuity. And on the technology side, I remember early on, people were saying, Steve, I love all those startups you come and lecture to us about, and thousands of them. They're really cool. Can you just get my dashboards to talk to one another? I don't even have that. The last thing I need is another app. And so that's the reality. And I guess I would ask you both about that aspect. Guys, great idea. The last thing I need is another app. I'm just trying to keep the wheels on the bus. Do we struggle against that too?
I think we do, but I think part of that is the making of our own demise, and that from an industry, we tend to be technical, right? We tend to be rolling up our sleeves, and we need to think about the financial, and we need to think, how do you monetize continuity? And so if the discussion isn't around, well, I need to make sure my boiler's up and running, right? Because that's not transferable. No one knows what to do with that. But if the discussion is around uptime, right, interruptions to production, service delivery, if you're in let's say the residential market, right, or the real estate development market, that uptime would be continuity within your revenue stream, right? And what happens if, let's say a construction project is delayed because of this, or you have to evacuate tenants because you can't find, let's say, a valve, and oftentimes it comes to that. And so I think for us, it's how do we monetize business continuity, and then within the profession to do a better job about communicating the value prop and putting numbers behind what that risk mitigation looks like.
Yeah, Michael, that also leads, you actually briefly touched on this as you're talking and thinking through this, but you touched on this knowledge transfer. So here's a simple example. Let's say we could hire employees, but if you hire employees, how long does it take to, bring them on board, right? I mean, how do you do the knowledge transfer? Now, here's an employee who has walked out, who's been there for 25 years or 30 years, who knows a ton of stuff. Do we take his notebook and give it to him? It's funny, I was talking to somebody from Northern Arizona University the other day, and he laughed and said, well, we do brain scans. So, it's just like, what do you do? I mean, you're an employee who has walked out. He was joking, of course. But the question is, that becomes an issue, isn't it? Knowledge transfer of really getting all this information and putting it in the hands of the new employees. Otherwise, the standard answer is, well, he's going to tail somebody who has been here for a long time, for 4 months, hoping that he'll learn as much as possible before the retirement date comes up.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
For what I'm seeing in terms of clients being able to bring someone on board and then transfer the knowledge, because really there's two different activities. Just to get someone onboarded now is you're looking at least 90 days, probably closer to 6 months realistically. And then to start to transfer the knowledge in hopes that the source of the knowledge is still there. That oftentimes for facilities takes, it's not measured in weeks, this is measured in years. So I think about like within facility management and the taxonomy, right, down to a UNSBSE code, right? I think I've got 38 commodities that set in my taxonomy. And for facility managers, then you have to have employees that are moving very in an agile way between these taxonomies. And so to get them spun up quickly, yeah, that is a challenge. It takes a long time, but honestly, I look to, Steve's world. Then I would ask him what's happening with VC money, right, for the tools, what's happening with academic research for the people.
Yeah, so on the VC side, as I mentioned, billions of dollars going into the space. There is activity in all areas of the business, and there is activity in facilities. It's not what we've seen totally cohesive. There are a couple of companies that have been trying to establish the DNA of a building. Could you map the genomic code of the building, which again it's sort of manifesting itself in this conversation about the digital twin. But let's forget digital twin for a while because there's a lot of hype around it. Some attempt to have a repository for this information so that there is a DNA and it has been mapped, and so that you're not totally stranded. You said the brain scan, that's probably a good idea. Of course, that all works only if the human enters the data into the system or somehow is forced to enter the data into the system. And but I can't say that there are any kind of notable ones. One area where there has been a fair amount of activity, and it was early on in this prop tech revolution when it started happening 8 or 10 years ago, was on energy management and energy efficiency. Right. And I think partly that was on the operational side, that was because they could show an ROI in 45 days, 60 days, 90 days on energy. They could either put the hardware in or adapt the software and say, hey, we've got case studies that prove I will make you money in X number of months, you'll get a payback.
Right.
And so those have been successful. But in some of the other areas, I mean, Suri, tell me, with ARC facilities, once the app is up and running, how do you make sure that the users use it, that the employees use it? Especially the ones who are used, the ones that are used to going to the map room, because they know where that roll is on the 4th shelf on the, up here.
Exactly. So
how do you get them to use
it's interesting thing, Steve, because we just had this conversation a couple of times this week with 2 customers, and the answer is the same. Well, the tenured employees don't want to use it. They're like, I know it already, so why bother, pull out the app? So he's not interested in doing that. He just moves on with whatever work he has, and he does the usual thing he does, unless he bumps into something that, I'm not too sure about the, let's say, a particular date with regard to warranty expiration or something like that, or some technical detail. Otherwise, largely they're walking encyclopedias. They continue to do the work. But the new ones always seem to be second nature to pull out the phone and swipe through and find the information. So that gap is there, and it's understandable because we have baby boomers on the one hand and then the millennials. So this jump is going to happen. But the important thing is to capture that knowledge from these baby boomers who are currently in employ and put that in the app. Once you get it in the app, then the knowledge is captured. Then the interesting thing is the institution or the building owners now have custody of that information. It doesn't move, unlike in the past, from one employee to another, because now it's all in the app and anybody can find that information. So I think it's a question of just bridging that gap and moving on to, and like Michael said, it's just an investment insurance policy to get all that information captured. And then once it's done, it'll automatically maintained by the next generation of employees, because that's just how they live their life. But we heard that from senior managers.
Is there an element of job security? A little bit of concern.
Absolutely. With the senior employees. And he said, I don't know why some of these people think that their job is more secure, because he knows a hidden valve. So
yeah, but I don't know. Could you, part of the incentive, first you might want to incentivize people somehow, but you may also want to just something as basic as, hey, this is not to replace you. This is to make you even more powerful than you already are, because there's always this human element to technology.
Yeah, that's a hard. Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Real quick, I was recently sitting in on a panel here at ProcureCon Indirect, but this is something that's come up more and more often. We tend to look at the business we're in, and then we go to the facility management, facility maintenance, what we do within the built environment.
Right.
And there has to be a change in the mindset, and the mindset needs to migrate to, we are a technology company. And you had made a point earlier, Steve, you had said essentially buildings are like computers with a roof. And if we can shift the mindset to, we are a data company that happens to do, and then fill in the blank. What we would see is in time, we would see a different understanding of the adoption rate, or a different caliber of the employee we're bringing in, or the ability to leverage that data to make informed decisions. Right? But there has to be a shift. And I think here again, within facilities maintenance management, we're hindered, right? Because we're not quick to adopt that technology. And so it has to come down to, how do we monetize it and begin to push the narrative that unless we become that data company and begin to leverage it appropriately, right, we are either going to, antiquate out, right, or we'll commoditize out, or something is going to happen. And so we need to fundamentally shift how we view our position within facilities to technology.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that, Michael, or something is going to happen. So that is going to be my next question. Do you think this will have an impact on emergency and life safety? Because you have tenured employees gone, you don't have the knowledge, something happens and you literally need that information within seconds. That could lead to a bigger problem with emergency and life safety.
The challenge is that we're going to get that with a lagging indicator, right? And so if you look at the data, really from 1970 forward, with all around the globe, we've got the equivalent to OSHA, and essentially we can track EMR rates and incident rates, and we're going to see safety, those numbers decline, and so
getting compromised
over time, right? And right or wrong, we're going to need some time to start to see those numbers come in, to see, as we've lost employees, now is that safety ticking up, or the rate of incidents ticking up, your EMR ticking up? Here again, this is another vehicle or language we can use to convey the importance, right? If we were to go back to the corporate organization and use the language of EMR to insurance costs, what's the value then of knowledge transfer? If we believe that we're creating greater risk to our employees, and we're creating greater financial risk or business continuity associated with it, then I think we've got a platform to have that discussion, reasonably.
Right. So
can I mention
that actually? Yeah, go ahead, Steve, please.
So let me give you another example of something that may influence the future. And risk and incidences are a little scary. This one, here's one that's a little more optimistic. The excitement around younger workers about climate and sustainability, and I mean, it's scary, but it's also a tremendous opportunity. There's a technology aspect to it, but there are, we know that the built environment, that number that gets thrown around, roughly 40% contributing to carbon output, there's a tremendous opportunity. And for anybody who is passionate about climate and sustainability and the future, and then you get to work with these assets that are some of the biggest assets, most complex assets in the world, that starts to be very appealing. And we start offering the latest, coolest technology. That starts to become very appealing to a certain portion of the workforce.
Yes, that's something that I do see. It's a groundswell, Steve.
Mhm.
And if I can go back, this is what's interesting from an HR perspective. If I can go back to a recent college graduate and talk to, for instance, how we're offsetting our carbon footprint because we're reducing drive time, right? And what technologies we're deploying to reduce drive time that influences our carbon footprint, right? It's an anecdotal conversation, but when you're recruiting and you're on college campuses, that sells. That's what they want to hear. What are you doing to either ESG, right, or diversity, equity, inclusion? Those things are driving, and they're driving the discussion to bring in to the pipeline. And so we've got to ask, what are we doing in that space? And specifically, right, I would ask, how are we utilizing technology to make those changes in terms of how we're operating that can then translate to, green initiatives or what have you.
Interesting. All very, very interesting subjects. So in the interest of time, let's keep moving on. One of the other things which I wanted to touch base and talk about is that the mobile technologies. Building operators are notorious for holding on to information on paper. I literally walk into any building. 9 out of 10 times if I walk into a building, they have some form of paper still in their document storage room. In fact, most building operators still have document storage rooms, and the few who have digitized it, is sitting on desktops. So how do facility leaders think about the mobile technology, and how important it is to move to a mobile technology to just address many of the things we just talked about? Michael, what's your thought on that?
Right or wrong, we're in a profession that's in the field, and
Right.
And so to have a discussion about utilization rates and not involve mobile technology is, I could spend better calories elsewhere. But I think that we're starting to see it, right? The data I was referencing earlier, there's a
Right.
greater adoption. I was on a team supporting a client years ago, 2000, and I'm going to date myself, but it was about 2004. And at the time, we were asking a question: how can we use a BlackBerry to tie into our CMMS that would give us a bill of materials or that would give us processes?
Right.
And this was a client that was high dollar infrastructure, very complex.
Right.
And today, today we're there, right? The question is, how much capital are we going to push to get there, right? To adopt that, do we have the personnel to adopt it? But
Right.
Any way you look at it, Suri, if you're having a discussion about utilization rates within facility maintenance management, and it doesn't involve mobile technology, then I think that you're not hitting the mark.
Yeah, I agree. Steve, do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, we hit on a couple of, I think a couple of the big ideas on this. Mobile is doing more with less. They need to operate the way we order food, the way we order Ubers, the way we book flights. The expectation and this is not generational. Yes, the younger workers have an expectation that that's just how we do things, and then they're kind of surprised when they get to the real estate industry and they find out we don't necessarily. But all age groups. I mean, the three of us who are in a different demographic, we all have gotten used to ordering through Amazon and doing everything so seamlessly through this thing. And I want my job to be like that too. So there's the expectation of the workers. There's this push to do more with less because of the shrinking workforce, the people who are aging out. We need those tools. And then now we've shown during COVID that it was happening before COVID. We all know that there was kind of a breaking up of we were heading toward remote work anyway. I mean, remember when telecommuting was the thing?
Yes, exactly.
And we actually got telecommuting after all these years. We got telecommuting, except it's called Zoom.
Finally.
Yeah, finally. And it took a pandemic, sadly. So I think it's inevitable, and it got accelerated. And boy, we better get on board with some element of mobile, because otherwise the other industries are going to just pass us by, and it would be unfortunate, wouldn't it?
So there's not.
I complete.
Real quick. you will hear more about IoT. And when we reach a space, we're not there right now, but when we reach a space where we truly are 5G and we have the chips to support it, right? That's another caveat. Right. When we get there, what you're going to see is companies are going to look for the synapse between where the information is at to when it's usable. Right, there's a synapse there that we need to address, and mobile technology has truncated that, and that's key. And we are going to see movement faster within facility maintenance management, specific to things like IoT and the ability for our assets to communicate with a server. We want that to push to a mobile technology, and that reduces the synapse, and that's the space that our facility directors and technicians need to be in.
Yeah, I completely agree, Michael. I think such an important point. We miss that because what happens typically in facilities is there's such a huge gap with how we live our lives today. Steve, to your point, right? We order our food, get our boarding passes, travel arrangement, you name it. I mean, this has become our lifeline, right? We just live off the mobile phone most of the time. But when he gets to work on a facility technician and you ask him whether he has an app to use it, and his sense is like, what are you talking about? Either I know it, or we just have to go to the document storage room. So I think it's going to change. It has to change, and I completely agree with you, Michael, because now with the impact of IoTs, if we, like you said, if we get all the chips in time and get all these things going in the right direction, we want to be able to operate all those devices efficiently, and the only way you can do that synapse is going to come through mobile. I completely agree. So before we close, let's talk of. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Michael.
There's a point with that. If you look at the compounded annual growth rate of facility maintenance, right, IFM, it's projected to. And what's interesting here is more and more you will not see where companies are self-performing, and so the person that comes on site may be different every time. Right. And so how does a company quickly convey, this is my facility, this is what we need to have serviced, this is the history of that asset. The ability to convey that to someone who may not have entered your site before becomes critical. And so companies need to start thinking in this mindset that if they want to move, and this space will shift, it'll shift to more of outsourced work. How do you take that information, put it in a mobile format, get it where it needs to be to this technician that is new in the profession, has never seen your facility?
Yeah, and it resonates so much with what we've been hearing, Michael. We go to college customers where they have actually either lost employees or laid off employees or have loss of staff, and now they are outsourcing everything. So even simple thing, hospitals, inspection of 5,000 smoke detectors, they don't do it in-house anymore. It's always outsourced. So it's a very relevant point. Go ahead, Steve, you had something to say.
Michael, what about when you say outsource? This is really an interesting idea about the outsourcing. What if outsourcing is you give the third-party vendor, the repair person, access to put on their HoloLens and digitally walk through your building because it's set up on a twin, but forget about the twin. They now can go in and service that air handler because they walk on site, they put on the HoloLens, they log in on a guest login, it tells them where to walk in the building. I mean, this could happen through our facilities as well. You're told where to walk in the building, and it tells you what panel to take off, and you're doing all of this through augmented reality, not virtual, but augmented through the lens. How far are we?
We're probably at least a decade out. It's happening now. So make no mistake, if you go onto a Chevron petrochemical site, they've got this technology and that's what they're deploying. But again, we walk before we can run. And so then it becomes, I'm not, as much as I would like to see the adoption of that technology, let's say for construction projects, to be able to walk a construction site, right, through an AI environment, fantastic, right? But where are we at really? And I think where the rubber hits the road right now is in that mobile technology, not the capital investment for the AI, but what can we do that's reasonable? And more, right or wrong, we tend to not have a capital budget or an OpEx budget that's going to take us to, the next
where we want to go.
right? And so we have to work within what's reasonable. What's reasonable right now is that mobile platform and the access to data. Really, what I want to see is I want a BOM, I want a preventative maintenance routine plan, and I want a location handy. And if possible, some history to the asset, great. But if that in itself was mobile and I can give that to anyone that fast, right? I'm happy.
And some intelligence. Even if it's mild AI and it's mild IoT, that will continue to evolve and get more and more powerful.
Exactly. Okay, gentlemen, this is so interesting and obviously, thought-provoking. Before we jump into questions, one last thing I would want you to touch on is what about operating cost? How is it going to impact the operating cost? Michael, I know you talk about it quite frequently, because one of the things which I hear from people is that that's not money we spent before, because they never allocated any money. You actually touched on it already. So now you're asking them to spend some money. Granted, it's lot less than what they spend on landscaping or cleaning, but still, it's money they didn't spend before. How do facility managers think about that? Going up and getting the budget approval, etc.
The perspective has to be really twofold. You've got a Capex budgeting cycle and an OpEx budgeting cycle, and we've been over the last decade, we've made huge advancements in terms of understanding what we can depreciate, what we should push to capital, and what we should push to OpEx. The other piece of it is the mindset has to be long term, and that again the business continuity. And so, not only working to understand what the internal rate of return is, but then taking the NPV of that and saying, if I make this change now, and if I forecast that over a 10-year horizon, this is what's happening to that money. This is how it compounds. That's the discussion that we need to have. And right or wrong, more so within facilities, the discussion is within a 12-month period usually, right? What do I have to spend this year and how am I going to allocate it? The mindset, if we're going to address the personnel shortage, if we're going to be able to adopt new technologies, that's the change again in mindset that we have to have.
Shifting mindset.
Are we leveraging the vehicle?
Agreed. Before we take questions, Steve, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, on this Capex OpEx, I think it's very interesting because the Capex may be some kind of software solution, but it has impact on the OpEx, because if you don't have great software, you're inefficient and you can't hire talent. So it is really joined at the hip, and Michael, you would know better than I that companies really have to rethink this relationship between Capex and OpEx, because they're sort of both. You can make them part of both, and that is not conventional thinking.
Yes, it's not an or discussion. It should be an and discussion.
Yeah.
And if there's research coming out of institutions that say if I adopt technology, you're going to see a 40% utilization increase. Right. So is that capital investment worth it? What is it? What do I get from it? And here again, I think we need to be more astute. We need to be able to put on a financial capsule and have that discussion with an intelligent discussion across from HR and finance about how we're managing our facilities.
Absolutely. I think this is the challenge facilities, senior leaders in facilities going to have, having this, clear understanding of, the impact of what's going on in the facilities world and how we are going to transform out of that, so that actually improve the operating cost, reduce the risk, risk mitigation is part of that, and be able to get hold of this, really get custody of the building information. Very good.
Suri, I'll say one last thing. There's some recent work on understanding the obsolescence penalty. This is mostly in the sustainability and climate conversation. Okay. There are rewards. We've shown with the data and the research we've done the rewards for having a building that is smart and connected and green, and we now I think is generally accepted. But now we're starting to understand what the obsolescence penalty is going to be, and it could be in the trillions of dollars. Now, that's speaking about real estate assets, but I would imagine maybe there's going to be a kind of a penalty. Well, there will be a penalty for not keeping up with this stuff. it'll be a labor penalty and all of the things we've been talking about. So that's an additional way to look at this, is that there's a reward, but there's also an obsolescence penalty, and that obsolescence is happening faster and faster.
Faster and faster. I completely agree. Well, this has been an excellent discussion, and we have a few minutes for the questions. Please go ahead.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So yes, thank you very much for that discussion. Really appreciate that. And of course, to our attendees for sending in questions. We do have time for just a few, so I will jump right in. And of course, please continue to send in your questions if you do have any. So let's see, you had talked about remote work, labor issues, project management. So I'm going to ask a few questions that tie that all together so we can cover some ground. One of the questions was talking about, can complex building information really be handled through mobile technology, specifically mobile phones that many techs are walking around with these days? And it says, I know you can do a lot with the apps these days, but can it really handle building information collected over decades, with all the institutional knowledge and needing to have that at the ready? What is the app that can really do that, and the tech that's prepared to do that?
Michael, would you like to take that? Do you have a perspective on that?
I don't believe it's reasonable to expect that something's going to be your panacea in this space. It's just not there. But it's also reasonable to expect that we can archive and collect recent data that has been either purchased or performed on an asset, and that's retrievable right now. Mobile doesn't have the computing power, certainly, right? So you're not going to run your Revit model through phone.
Absolutely.
But can we retrieve the data that's been modeled? You bet.
There you go, Ann.
Okay, so okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And the question is, this is one that's top of mind for many folks. What about security, cybersecurity? Mobile phones can get hacked. Obviously, other devices can as well. So can you talk about, from maybe the ARC facility standpoint, or Michael or Steve, what you've seen in terms of security of mobile technology? What is there to be concerned or glad about in that sphere?
Steve, what are you hearing?
Well, I certainly wonder. And this would be a question for somebody who heads IT or digital security. Just the idea of bring your own device. When companies started allowing me to use my own phone for company business,
right,
that's got to keep you awake at night. And then add to it now, as a result of the pandemic, you've got people working in their living rooms, and they're in WeWorks out in the suburbs, and they're in, I don't know, Bermuda. This has got to be something that really keeps people at night. I don't have an answer on this, but I really would like to know how this is going to turn out.
It's the feed of information. So at this point in time, we're not looking.
Michael, we can't hear you.
Oh.
I can hear
Michael. Yep, I can hear you. Yep, go ahead.
It's the feed of information. And so I'm looking to push information to a tech. I'm not interested right now in the tech feeding back information through that mobile device, right? And so, and that becomes the key. If we're actually, as if it's a two-way dialogue, it becomes more problematic. But again, walk before we can run. If I can push data out to the tech, have we made a gain? I think that we have. And then the security piece, would come later. But to your point, Steve, I'm not IT, so I'm well out of my bandwidth here.
Yeah, and I think the security question is commonly asked by almost every director, senior management company, and the answer is security will always be a challenge, ongoing challenge, and it's always also addressed, and newer solutions come up with, whether it's in the banking or biometrics or dual factor authentication, they keep improving the security, and it's a constant challenge, and it's no different to what we experience either in the financial sector or in the healthcare sector. I think it's an ongoing thing, and as challenges become greater, and I think so will the solutions be. We can go on to the next question, Ann.
Okay, thank you. I do want to, we just have a few minutes, and I thank everyone for their questions. I do want to touch on the the retirement aspect of, because that is so specific, or at least relevant to facility management these days. And so we talked about retirement, the younger generation coming on, and that institutional knowledge. So the question here, and I'll paraphrase as well, is we have some tenured staff that has been here for decades retiring. How do you suggest to give existing staff the access to information to do their job? And here we're talking about technology a lot. So can you talk about how technology can help that, maybe ways you've seen that work as we go through this transition in the FM space?
Michael, you want to take that?
I tend to think that we need to simplify, and this is kind of, now we've mentioned this quite a bit, but we need to create a situation. I tend to think that the large scale CMMS that we would have seen, right, the Maximo that's sitting out there,
right,
it's not agile enough, and it doesn't necessarily address this need well. And I tend to think that we need to simplify the technology and move to more of an app-based CMMS to convey that, to transfer the knowledge. I tend to be in that space with regard to how we're managing assets and how we're transitioning knowledge. The other piece of that is they both have their applications, certainly, but as facility managers, more and more, and COVID has taught us this, we need to be very agile. We need to be mobile. We have to understand that your workplace is going to change, the environment is going to change, and our technology and our knowledge transfer has to be responsive.
Thank you, Michael. Steve, closing comments? I think we are right at that time.
I think we are right on that time. The observation on this transformation, this transition that's happening, that's ongoing, it will be messy, we'll make mistakes, but we'll learn a lot, and we'll look back. I think it was Bill Gates and probably other people who said we overestimate the promise of technology in the first 2 years, and we underestimate in the 10 years. So 10 years from now, if we get together and have this webinar again, I think we will be struck by how much of a transformation did take place, despite all of the things we talked about, all of the challenges we talked about in the last hour.
Agree.
That's great.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Sorry, I would like to
hand it back to you.
I'm sorry. Yes, I would like to jump in just with one more question, if you would, because it just came in under the wire. And this question is, what would be the first step to e-organizing the whole room full of paper data? So I suppose that person may be looking at what you just put up on your slide there and wondering, based on this whole conversation we're having, can you kind of wrap up with that? Maybe what the first step would be to reorganizing that situation in a facility?
Yeah, thank you. I can take that. We talk about that all the time with our customers. The first step is to really get your arms around all of the building information you have. I mean, obviously, whether you have archival as-builts or architectural, mechanicals, electricals, typically in a campus or a large building, they're spread all over the place. Some of them are in desktops, some of them are in hard drives. Believe it or not, some people even have microfiche still, depending on how old the building are. I mean, you're talking to some college campuses who are nearly 100+ years old, and I'm sure, Steve, you know a few things about that, being in the MIT campus. So,
yes.
So the documents all over. Important thing is to put your arm around all of the documents and create one master set of documents, or one source of truth, so to speak, for the building, and keep that updated. I mean, it's so important because, like, I was just talking to hospitals. Every year they have about 50 or 100 new projects going on, meaning expansions, renovations, retrofits. And where do these documents go? They get done and they show us up in another disk or another desktop, and it sits there. Nobody takes the time to integrate that and put it in one master set, and then have a single source of truth accessible. Once you establish that, getting access to that is the easiest thing, because previously there was a question of, is mobile technology capable of doing that? Now, mobile technology may not be capable of, like Michael said, processing very large files. But if you have all the information centralized on a single platform in a cloud, accessing that can easily be done. So it'd be like carrying a plan room in your pocket if you actually have it accessible through the mobile device.
And can I make a quick closing comment?
Sure.
Facility management, and for facility directors, you have a once in a generational opportunity here. And that is, if you expect to do business as usual post-pandemic, you're missing that opportunity. You can use the data, you can use the changes and the willingness to adapt to change now to make those asks that you need to ask, or to effectively change and influence how you're managing your facility, your real estate footprint. And I would urge you, look to take advantage of that opportunity. If you go back to the way you were doing it pre-pandemic, you've missed the opportunity. Take advantage of it.
Okay.
Great
Good
point.
Michael.
Great point.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that's
All right.
it. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
All right.
everybody. Good to see you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Steve.
Okay,
Good discussion.
great conversation. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And I'd welcome everyone to look on the screen here. You can get a demo. You can request a demo from ARC Facilities if you're interested in learning how to digitize your files, your building plans, and beyond. Again, I want to thank our presenters today, ARC Facilities, for sponsoring the webinar, and to our audience for attending and your questions. A recording from today's session will be made available on our magazine's website. That's facilityexecutive.com, and also at ARC's website, and that's ARC Facilities, arcfacilities.com. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.